Welcome to 15 Minutes with Longevity. My name is Giselle Wertheim-Ames and I'll be your host for the show. Today we're talking to Marc Kahn. He's the Head of Human Resources and Organisation Development at Investec, as well as Lesley-Anne Gatter, who is also from Investec and is Head of Learning and Development. We're going to be talking about women's health. So, great to have you in the studio, Marc, second time round in less than a few months. Let's talk about women, specifically in the workplace, and this notion of whether wellness and career development, family, all go together, or whether it's an absolute myth, and how we are dealing with it in South Africa at the moment.
I think in South Africa and globally, it's a struggle for women in particular and for industry as a whole. There are a lot more challenges that a woman faces in the workplace than a man does. And you know, we can even list them, not the least of which would be the very straightforward one where women give birth to children, they take maternity leave, and that creates resourcing problems for a company, but it also creates career questions and existential questions for a woman around looking after young children and her career. That alone, and there are many others, challenge the career path for a woman and connect to her sense of wellness and what it is to attend to the needs of a child and her own body during maternity, during pregnancy, and managing the stresses of work. Put that all together, I personally don't think we've solved for it.
So we can say that women are more stressed generally in the workplace than their male counterpart.
I think they've got a lot more complexity to manage in terms of their personal work-life balance. It's got to be harder, and I say that as a man. You know, but I think it would be interesting to
I think, Lesley-Anne, from your perspective, and how are we responding to this? Because we understand it's a problem, and I think there's a lot of pressure on women to be this kind of superwoman character. Is it attainable, and how can we facilitate it in the workplace?
So I think that it is a complex problem, and the reality is that there's two sides to the debate. The one side is, and I think in America has become known as the Sandberg-Slaughter debate, where Sandberg is pushing for women to lean in, to stay in their careers and for organizations and each other, women as a support network, to help each other and stay in the workplace for as long as possible through the years that are hard, and then come out the other end and be successful and be able to achieve what they require. Whereas Slaughter is saying you can't have it all, and it's not possible. She herself left a job in the White House to go and look after an ill child who really needed her, and she said women can't have it all. So it's an individual quest that women are on to see how they can be in the workplace, but also for organizations and industry as a whole to look at how they can support women in terms of staying in the workplace through various different policies and structures like flexible working hours, like wellness programs, like creches, different structures that could help women stay at work and manage their responsibilities at home.
So the research is showing that there's this fallout. I mean, I've seen some of those stats. The women are just not getting it, and we see it in the boardroom representation and senior management representation in most listed companies in South Africa. So we know it's a fact, we know all these elements, and we have these options, but it doesn't seem to be showing through in terms of the long-term career orientation, because those women that are falling off out of the situation aren't coming back, even if they are temping or doing this flexi hour thing. From what I've seen and read, they are not coming back into the workplace at very senior levels.
Look, if you have a look at the life cycle of a career, you've got your sort of 20s, which is really where you get started, and then really between the age of say 30 and 40, that is a key tenure period where if you don't get ahead, your positioning to be in a senior executive role after that in your 50s is curtailed. But that happens to be slap bang in the middle of the period of time that most women have their children. So for women that then take the time out to be a mother for a period of time, or take their foot off the gas, you know, like Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook talks about, during that period, to come back and get into a senior executive role after that and compete with other men and women who've not done that, puts them, you know, behind in the race. Plus, asking them to come back and do that, having been out for a while, is a tall order. You know, one gets into a sort of career rhythm, so to speak. And I think that is something we haven't solved for.
Now, obviously, we're focusing a lot on women, but women tend to be either in a part, especially if they're married, they have a partner who's probably also working in a similar situation, especially when you're young, you're all building a career, both of you. How do we make this not just a woman's problem, but also equally the man or the partner or the family support mechanism around that woman? How are corporates, and particularly you, how do you address that?
Well, Les and I discussed this, curiously enough, in both our roles as leaders at Investec, who focus on this as a problem, as both a man and a woman, but also as in terms of our business responsibilities. And I must say that there are times in which we're short for answers. I think that's an important message to go out there. Is it's not as if I think that we've worked it out. No. I think that we've searched around, we've read everything we can, we've invited speakers, we had a conference at the beginning of the year in the company, and I think after that we were left with the sense that, well, this is really tough. And you get to your point about each woman has to make her own call. And can the company accommodate the different calls that women make? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no.
So and I think that I think some of the things we've seen that could be enabling is the structure of a package and a contract. So how can it look when you work flexible hours or different hours? So if some woman would like to start a day at 7 o'clock in the morning and end at 3, which is still a full working day, as opposed to 8 to 5, those types of scenarios. Alternatively, there's also issues around sponsorship, where we've seen lots of women calling for sponsors in the organization, and those sponsors need to be men who will champion them and support them and take a risk on them a lot of the time. And a lot of the successful women that we see have had important sponsors who've really driven and pushed their career. And our Women in Leadership Day at Investec showed that remarkably, that there'd been a lot of women who people had taken risks on, and they were prepared to help them seed in terms of the corporate ladder. I guess also we'd be remiss if we only thought of women as mothers. There's plenty of women in the working force who equally experience discrimination and difficulty in climbing that corporate ladder and experience a glass ceiling and wellness issues inside the environment, and who have chosen, for lots of different reasons, not to be mothers, but equally feel prejudiced in the organization. So the problem is complex, because it's not just about women who have young children at home and want to go to birthday parties. It's complex because women have aspirations and want to be at home and face prejudice in the environment.
True. And also physiologically, I mean, I've often had this discussion with doctors that, women are physiologically different to men. So they deal with stress differently to a way the men, and they're probably more susceptible to stress because they have hormonal shifts that are part of a natural woman cycle. And this is a very interesting thing, because how a woman would deal with stress would be different to how a man does, and how their deficiencies are affected, different times in their life, will also have a huge impact on their ability to cope with stresses in the workplace. Again, are we taking this into consideration when we look at our wellness programs, for example? Are companies considering this? It's a kind of a hectic debate in a way, because you don't want inequality in that way, but at the same time, there should actually be some consideration around these factors and additional support.
From a sort of psychological point of view, if we take the way women and men work differently with emoting and emotions, little boys are taught, don't cry when you're a kid, otherwise you're weak, and women are given permission to emote. And I think in many respects, when we look at the workplace, we can see a masculine culture of emotion there, where it's seen as not okay to cry.
It's weakness.
And it's labelled as weakness. But this is labelled as weakness is really a masculine idea. It's not a feminine idea. When women are with each other, crying doesn't make you weak. Men, when they're with each other, might think of that, particularly more immature men. In the workplace, we frequently see scenarios where there's a bit of pressure or there's a hard discussion that happens, and a woman in the workplace might have some tears in her eyes. And then she'll be frustrated with herself around it because of how it's being read. It's quite rare to see men tear up at work. And I think in some ways that just speaks to a different psychological culture, different emotional culture, which is being dominated by maleness rather than a shared culture. And I think that's really the future, is where we have a feminine culture and a masculine culture that coexist in a working environment. And we don't have these labels which, in many respects are coming from a masculine idea. I don't know if you...
No, I would endorse it. I think I once saw a bumper sticker that said, women who want to play in a man's world are unambitious. And the idea is that entering into that space possibly is you're fighting a battle that you can't win, and that it's this shared new culture that has both the feminine and the masculine in it that's well represented. And I think men come from, you're playing in an environment that's about, rule and topple, essentially, where women like to share and commune in much more meaningful ways. And I think it's not who's better and who's worse, but how can they come together, because there could be a lot more productivity and a lot more benefit in a shared environment and a shared culture than one that favors one over the other and can understand the realities of those environments.
Now, many women would say that, funny enough, they find women in the workplace more prejudicial to their advancement than men. So men will support them more than their own women. Is this something that you've seen that you agree with?
I think the sort of psychology or the sociology of that happens not just to women, but it happens to any group which is targeted in a group situation. Those that are under pressure will sometimes sort of rub up against each other in order to get ahead. And it's not particular to women, it might be particular to a kind of group dynamic, so to speak. And we have seen in many organizations, we do see that women sort of are a little harder towards each other than perhaps they should be. Equally so, I think we will sometimes see some women that are very supportive of each other, more so than any man would be, and we still see, unfortunately, we see a lot of sexist men in the organization. Quite severe sexism, it's prevalent, there's no question about it. I'm often shocked when I see it, coldly, as it sometimes comes out.
But we have very progressive labour policies that should be dealing with that.
And so, as with everything in life, the law in this case is aspirational rather than lived. We talk about a level playing field, but I think this is important, both men and women conspire to make the playing field at work not level. I think that both genders need to work together to sort that out. I don't think it's men versus women or women up against men. It's actually us together creating a strange idea that one gender is less than another.
And it should be like that in life. So just very quickly before we close, I'll come back to you, Marc. What would your advice be to women in workplace, ambitious, young, starting out, looking at their future ahead? What advice would you give them?
Sure, I would presume that I've managed to do this. I think you've got to know that balance for me and having both is about sometimes one takes priority and then sometimes the other does. So my children and my family are obviously always important, but sometimes work is just the majority of time that I have to spend, and I know I'm going to make that up by attending to my home and my family as well, and equally in a time that can accommodate that, and that to be the mother I need to be and the woman I need to be, and also the leader I need to be in my environment, I need to do both.
Great. Marc, quick.
For me, I think we keep learning. Admit that we don't have the solutions, and that also the workplace doesn't have to solve the gender relations of the planet. It's where we see it at its core, but really I think it happens at home. Watch how you parent your children, both mom and dad, and what you role model. Because what you role model, that's what that child is going to, when they're an adult in the workplace, male or female, that's how they're going to treat the other gender. That's where we should start.
Well, lots of food for thought. Thank you very much for joining me in the studio. Well, that's it for this week's show. Tune in next week where we'll be discussing everything you need to know about keeping your eyes healthy. Stay well, be healthy, and I look forward to seeing you here next week for your dose of health news.